In this Diablo 4 video, we're going to be taking a look at the Rend Barbarian, which is a beginner barbarian build that focuses on the use of the Rend ability to set bleeding and to finish things off with the Death Blow ability. This build is of course intended for the open beta coming up this weekend, and you can use it there if you want. However, it will probably extend to the full version of the game as well. So let's get into the abilities. The first one I want to take a look at here is Death Blow. Death Blow does a ton of damage to like a cone in front of you, and if it kills a target, then it instantly refreshes its cooldown. It normally has like a 15-second cooldown, so you definitely want to make sure that you're killing targets with this, otherwise you're going to have to wait in order to use this. What's great about this is you can lead off with this sometimes when there are a lot of weak enemies in order to build up Fury easily, and then you can use Rend off that Fury that you gain, and you don't have to sit there and use Frenzy to build it up or use your basic attacks. You just use Death Blow to kill enemies, to gain Fury, to then attack. Now sometimes it doesn't always go according to plan, or maybe there's no squishy targets for you, so you'll have to use Frenzy first in order to build up some Fury, and then you can use Rend, and then as enemies get weakened, you can finish them off with Death Blow, and then sort of starts a chain reaction. The idea here is that you use Death Blow to kill a weak enemy, then it hits multiple enemies if you're positioned correctly that are then weakened, that you can then finish off with another Death Blow, hopefully hitting more enemies, and then those enemies are weakened, and then you start this chain reaction of Death Blows. And then if there's nothing that you can Death Blow easily, you use Rend to soften them up and just keep chaining this process. So obviously we talked a bit about Rend there. Let's talk about Rend. This does an AoE in front of you that does a little bit of physical damage, and then it does a bunch of bleeding over time. And the reason bleeding is important here is because by using the hamstring passive, you can actually slow the targets that you're hitting with this. But what's more important than that is that you can get damage to slowed enemies on your gear, increasing the damage that you do, allowing your Death Blow to deal more damage. So as I just mentioned, the strategy is to kind of alternate back and forth between Rend and Death Blow. You go in there, you hit with Rend, everything takes some damage, starts bleeding, and when it gets close to death, you run in with Death Blow, finish it off, hopefully hit some other targets, finish them off. Kind of repeating this, alternating between these as necessary, and it's kind of a hit and run tactic sometimes. You're not always just hanging in there like you would with a Whirlwind build. You're running in, hitting, backing off, waiting for the bleed to do more damage, or hitting with Rend, waiting for the bleed to do more damage, backing off, and then hitting with Death Blow again and again. And another great thing here too is that because we're using Furious Rend, the morph of Rend, we're gaining Fury each time we hit enemies with Rend as well. So between Death Blow gaining it when you kill an enemy and Furious Rend giving you Fury, you never have Fury problems. You shouldn't have to basic attack very often with this build. So next let's talk about Frenzy and when you use Frenzy and why we have it in this build. So obviously we need a basic attack here because sometimes you don't have resources, etc. Things don't go according to plan. We need that. And Frenzy just gets faster and faster as you attack, being able to attack very, very quickly. So when you're using it, you want to use it for longer than 3 swings. Ideally, that's maximum. And Frenzy is really good when you muff up Death Blow and you need to get, more Fury somehow, or when you're facing like a single difficult target because, can't Death Blow it and Rend, maybe you don't have enough Fury to kill it with Rends. So when you're sitting there in between Rends, you're going to be wailing on it with Fury, and because we're using the Combat Frenzy morph of this, we're having good damage reduction while we're doing this, allowing us to kind of like face tank bosses. So when you're sitting there fighting those bosses, you're going to use Combat Frenzy, and you're going to keep using it, and then when Rend comes up, you're going to hit Rend. Every time Rend's off cooldown, you're going to hit it. And Death Blow, if you can work in a Death Blow here and there to get some increased damage, even though it'll go back on cooldown, you should use it, unless you know that you're going to be within that kind of striking distance to finish the thing off. You want to use Death Blows on bosses as soon as they're up in order to just get as much damage on a boss as possible. And Pressure Point here gives us 30% chance to make enemies vulnerable when we hit them with a core skill, which is Rend. So Rend has a chance to make enemies vulnerable, which is great because that'll increase the damage we do to them. So if you're sitting there wailing on a boss, hit him with Rend, make him vulnerable, keep attacking, and then, hit him with Rend again, make him vulnerable sometimes. It's really, really good strategy. And you definitely want to hit with that Death Blow if you can while that vulnerable is up in order to get even more damage on the boss. We also have Leap here. I really only have 1 point in Leap, and that's just for maneuverability. Sometimes you get knocked away from a boss and allow you to get back to him, or sometimes you're in a really bad spot, like you're about to get frozen by some stuff, or you're trapped somewhere and you need to get out. Leap's just a great way. It's good for mobility to get you out of a bad situation, or maybe you want to leap into a bunch of enemies and hit with Rend. Beyond this, we have Challenging Shout, and the reason for this is because it increases your damage reduction by 40% for almost 10 seconds, with a 25-second cooldown. This is great for those scenarios where you're fighting a lot of enemies. It can protect you and save you, but also when you're fighting like a single boss. Being able to reduce the damage this boss does to you while you're just sitting there face tanking it with Combat Frenzy can be a lifesaver. Even 10 out of every 25 seconds, reducing the damage that you take is really, really strong. And lastly, we have Iron Skin here. This is sort of a flex spot. You can put whatever you want in here. If you want another offense ability, you can, or a different defensive ability, or Shout, or whatever you want. An ultimate can go here. But I like Iron Skin here because it's another defensive ability that allows you to create a barrier for 50% of your missing HP. So when your HP starts getting down at the bottom, if you're out of potions, or maybe you just want to conserve potions, you can pop Iron Skin. And if you have the tactical Iron Skin morph, this is going to heal you back up while that barrier remains. So you can actually use it kind of like a potion every, 15 seconds or so to heal yourself. And between that and Challenging Shout, you're not going to die very easily. And you have tons of DPS with Rend and Deathblow, so you don't really need much more, but this will allow you to survive in scenarios where maybe you wouldn't. One really good legendary aspect for this build is the aspect of Anemia. This allows you for a chance to stun enemies when you hit them with direct damage if they are bleeding, which happens quite frequently. Remember that Rend does direct damage as well as bleeding damage, so if you hit a bunch of enemies with Rend and then hit them with Rend again, even if you don't use Deathblow, you could stun them and that'll allow you to get an easy Deathblow, or at least back away while they're stunned and bleeding. And also remember that aspects gain double the bonus if they're on two-handed weapons versus one-handed weapons or armor. So you're going to want to try and put this on your two-handed blade if possible. That's what you use for this skill when you use it. So try and find that on a two-handed blade, or make sure that you go to the occultist and slot it on there in order to get even more chance to stun enemies. So that wraps up our Rend Barbarian build. Again, this is meant for open beta. It is just kind of a basic version of this build in order to get you going. I'm not going to go into all the possible gear things that you can have and the stats and all this, etc. But it just gives you a rough idea of how you can play this build in the upcoming beta this weekend, and possibly at the beginning of your playthrough when the full game comes out. Obviously, we'll have more comprehensive guides for, beginner builds and stuff around then with more specifics when we have the whole game unlocked, but this should help you this weekend as well.